The Western gave us heroes, myths, and told you the frontier was worth something. These 9 films aren't so sure. Acid Westerns take everything the genre promised and leave it to rot in the sun. Nobody was making Westerns in West Germany in 1970, but apparently Roland Klick didn't get the memo. He drops a wounded young man called Kid into a sun-blasted wasteland carrying a suitcase full of stolen cash and a bullet in his arm. A broken-down opportunist named Charles Dump finds him, steals the case, then thinks better of it. A third man, Sunshine, is already coming for the money. The 3 of them end up circling each other in an abandoned mining town with nothing left but heat, suspicion, and bad intentions. None of them are particularly fast. None of them are noble. And the ghost town they're trapped in looks like a place that already gave up. Tucked inside the suitcase with the cash is a can record. It ends up on a broken turntable, the needle sticks, and the song loops across the empty streets while everything falls apart. Most acid westerns feel like westerns with added layers, but Deadlock feels like the genre stripped back down to its bones and left rotting for the vultures. Dead Man isn't your typical western. Jim Jarmusch gives it the Jim Jarmusch treatment, writing and directing it in black and white while filling it with an all-star cast of oddballs, including Robert Mitchum in his final screen performance, Billy Bob Thornton,
"Why don't you shut your goddamn trap and just eat your beans?"
Crispin Glover, and Iggy Pop, among others. Johnny Depp plays William Blake, a meek Cleveland accountant who arrives in the frontier town of Machine to find his promised job is gone. He gets caught in a lover's quarrel and ends up shot, on the run, and slowly dying. A native man named Nobody, played by Gary Farmer, finds him and decides he's the reincarnation of the English poet William Blake. From there it stops being a western and becomes a poetic vision quest. If that isn't enough, Neil Young scored the entire movie improvising alone in a studio while watching a cut of the film. It cost $9 million and made barely $1 million back, but it's a strange and unique snapshot of the 90s. There's a town called Lago, an unnamed stranger, and a debt nobody wants to talk about. High Plains Drifter takes its time letting you figure out which one is the threat. Clint Eastwood directs and plays an unnamed stranger who rides out of the desert into the mining town of Lago. He kills 3 hired gunmen within minutes and gets hired to protect the town from a worse threat coming down the road. Ernest Tidyman wrote the script fresh off his Oscar for The French Connection, pulling from the 1964 Kitty Genovese murder, where eyewitnesses watched a woman die and did nothing. Verna Bloom and Mariana Hill play 2 women caught in Eastwood's orbit, and neither one is safe. He forces the townspeople to paint every building blood red, rename the place Hell, and dress the locals up like fools while the real reason he's there slowly bleeds through. John Wayne hated it, writing Eastwood a letter saying it wasn't what the West was about. But he was right, and that's the point. Bone Tomahawk is one of the most brutal westerns ever made, and while it's technically less of an acid western, it's a good example of genre bending with a horror film buried inside it. It starts as a typical western, with Kurt Russell playing Sheriff Franklin Hunt, an aging lawman in the small frontier town of Bright Hope. When a cannibal tribe abducts 2 townspeople in the night, Hunt puts together a rescue party. His dim but good-natured deputy, played by Richard Jenkins, a cold and capable gunslinger played by Matthew Fox, and the injured husband of the kidnapped woman, played by Patrick Wilson. The 4 of them ride out into the desert, and the film takes its time getting where it's going. That patience is the point, with director S. Craig Zoller spending the middle of the film on conversation, the 4 men talking, disagreeing, sizing each other up, while the landscape empties out around them, and the sense of dread builds without anything attached to it. By the time the horror arrives, it lands like a physical shock, not because it's unexpected, but because Zoller made you forget it was coming. He uses the Western framing as a weapon, and while most acid Westerns use the genre to ask strange questions, this one uses it to set a trap. Sonny and Jed isn't the first film that comes up when people talk about acid westerns, but it earns the lane. Director Sergio Corbucci takes the outlaw couple framework and drags it across the Mexican border. Tomas Milian plays Jed Trigardo, a foul-mouthed bandit working a Robin Hood routine in the Bandera region, robbing the rich and tossing scraps to the poor. Susan George plays Sonny, a tomboy who decides she's going to be an outlaw and attaches herself to him whether he wants her or not. Kojak turns up as Sheriff Franciscus in fur coat and sunglasses, chasing them across the borderlands. Corbucci spent the late 60s making Django, The Great Silence, and Compañeros, the kind of westerns that defined the genre's hard edge. By 1972, the spaghetti boom was burning out, and he leaned into Bonnie and Clyde territory instead, staging the couple as neither hero nor villain. Ennio Morricone's score serves the movie quite well, as one would expect from a Morricone score. But the core of the movie is Corbucci channeling the hippie counterculture he openly distrusted and turning it loose on the Western. If you love cinema and videos like these, give us a like and subscribe if you haven't already. More like this right here, behind the velvet curtain. McCabe and Mrs. Miller looks and sounds like a Western. It just doesn't believe in any of the same things. Directed by Robert Altman, Warren Beatty plays John McCabe, a small-time gambler who rides into the raw Pacific Northwest mining town of Presbyterian Church and sets up a brothel. Julie Christie plays Mrs. Miller, an opium-addicted madam who arrives and immediately tells him he's doing everything wrong. They become partners, fall into something close to love, and then a mining corporation tries to buy them out. It's a decision that drives everything. Altman fills the town with people who have nothing to do with the story, and conversations you can barely make out. Leonard Cohen provides the score, which means there's a low hum of loss underneath every scene, whether anything bad is happening or not. Some of the best westerns of the era were made by directors who didn't particularly like westerns, with Roger Ebert giving the film 4 stars out of 4. He wrote, "It's like no other western ever made. Robert Altman has made a dozen films that can be called great in one way or another, but one of them is perfect, and that one is McCabe and Mrs. Miller." Pat Garrett and Billy the Kid isn't really about the outlaw. It's about the lawman who sells out to hunt him down. Sam Peckinpah directs and James Coburn plays Pat Garrett, an aging sheriff hired by wealthy New Mexico cattle barons to hunt down his old friend Billy the Kid, played by Chris Christopherson. Garrett knows where Billy is, but he spends most of the film finding reasons not to go there. Bob Dylan plays a drifter called Alias.
Who are you?
That's a good question.
Who turns up in scenes the way a bad omen turns up, quietly and without explanation. Sam Peckinpah builds the film around delay rather than pursuit. Those detours are the film, with people and places already disappearing and a West that knows it's finished. Bob Dylan scores it like a funeral procession moving at its own pace, unhurried but certain of where it's going. MGM cut it down, and Peckinpah tried to have his name removed. The version he intended didn't surface until 1988, and it's now in the Criterion Collection. Both versions exist, but only one of them is his. It's less a chase film than a 2-hour farewell to something that was already gone. Most westerns are about leaving somewhere and never returning, but 1971's The Hired Hand is about coming back. Peter Fonda directs and stars as Harry Collings, a drifting cowboy who walks back to the wife and daughter he abandoned 7 years earlier, asking to stay on as the hired hand. Warren Oates rides in with him as Arch, his closest friend, and Verna Bloom plays the wife who has spent 7 years learning to live without him. There's a kidnapping that forces a choice between the two, but the gunfights aren't the point. The stillness around them is. Universal handed Fonda $1 million and total creative control as part of a young filmmaker program that also funded Dennis Hopper's The Last Movie and George Lucas's American Graffiti. Vilmos Zsigmond shot it across New Mexico using naturalistic imagery, and it looks gorgeous. Bruce Langhorne scored it like a half-remembered hymn, and the studio got something closer to a tone poem than a western. Critics buried it and called it a hippie western, but 50 years later, it's still one of the most memorable westerns to sneak out of the 70s. El Topo is one of the weirdest westerns ever made. It grinds the whole genre down and rebuilds it as a religious fever dream. Alejandro Jodorowsky writes, directs, scores, and stars as a black-clad gunfighter riding through the desert with his naked 7-year-old son, played by his actual son Brontis, hunting the bandits who slaughtered a village. That's the setup, but the movie keeps shedding its skin. He rides off with a woman he names Mara and ends up on a surreal quest to kill 4 gunmasters in the desert. By the third act, he's underground in a cave full of outcasts, half saint, half monster. The film only got seen because of a midnight slot at New York's Elgin Theater in 1971, where John Lennon happened to wander in. He pushed Beatles manager Alan Klein to buy the rights, and ABKCO Films rolled it across the country. The score even got re-recorded at Abbey Road for Apple Records, but without that one screening, the movie likely stays buried, and instead, it basically invents the acid western.